Jalanguru lango palangara wiyana grama yana pugayane. Ngada jingara ngaratanga ola ngara yanange ponova. Good morning, good day, ladies, gentlemen, young people. I speak to you firstly in my first language, ponova. Nanga ngatel yora. This is looking to the future. Look ahead towards the future. Thank you for this opportunity to share this platform this morning with two amazing women. Marcia, Langton, you have educated so many of us to believe in ourselves and our lives and what's important for us. You continue to be our mentor and our support and help in creating the change within systems, particularly in the learning space, academia and the political space, to truly hear and listen to our voices. So it's an honour to be sharing this platform with you this morning. Dame Annette King, we've both shared other spaces together, speaking on various issues, and it's an honour to be here in person with you and to share this space also, and to hear of your incredible work in Aotearoa and in pursuing change, in strengthening the voices of Māori on your lands and to educate Pākehā non-Māori people to value the worth of Māori cultures and lives of your people. So thank you for being here. I want to acknowledge the previous panel and particularly Maxi and Kalia. I work with them at Yiramalay also, and I'm just blown away by both of them, their confidence, their ability to be strong advocates as young people from communities. These young people come from communities very similar to Yolngu communities and other communities across our country. And to see them shine in the way that they did this morning at this important panel, speaking about their education journey. I want to acknowledge all of the education experts among us as well. And whilst I'm no trained professional education expert, I think all of us come with education as part of our responsibilities as people of all of our societies that we come from. I want to acknowledge the Yolngu and YYF and everyone for bringing us all together here today and for the next few days. So in sharing this space, I will give some of my perspectives around what's important in terms of curricula that speaks to acknowledging the presence of the world's continuous and oldest civilization on earth. Now, how dare we not include and acknowledge the Indigenous civilization from this continent in all education and learning pathways? Just ask yourself that. Because a strong and expansive education opens worlds to us, but particularly the world of Indigenous Australians and Indigenous peoples throughout the world helps to inform and educate and provide world views to non-Indigenous peoples, to develop their understanding, to understand their place in how they can work and be useful tools in societies across the world. So education helps to form us as individuals while equipping us with the tools to influence and develop the societies, cultures and humanities that we want to be a part of. We're not just talking about Indigenous peoples having opportunities and to be treated justly in our pursuit of our right to education, but it should be everyone else's right to be educated about Indigenous peoples and cultures and societies. And our Indigenous educational systems have always been foundational to engaging in life, to living life, and bringing our worlds into being. I learnt to walk in both worlds, as many of the Yolngu and other Indigenous peoples here. And in doing so, to step from one reality into another with the educational tools from both existences and learning journeys. Today, we are also challenged by the reality of what the imposition of a Western education system has done to our people. Been absolute denial of our presence, our existence, let alone our histories and what our contributions can be to this nation and to the world. That is the education system that we have experienced, and that has got to change. Today, we are also challenged by the reality of what the imposition has done to our people, not just in one generation, but many generations. For many of our people, our connection to country, to family, and to kin, our teachers and our classrooms was severed multiple times. First at colonisation, and then with the ongoing policies of removals, the stolen generation and the assimilation, with no respect to what knowledge has been kept within our societies. The intergenerational ramifications of the denial of our education, which is fundamentally a denial of the worth of our knowledges and who we are as a peoples, have been extreme. Still, no matter the overwhelming challenges we face, our peoples have survived, and with us we carry vital learnings of resilience and our inherent values of intergenerational care, learning, and responsibility. There is another foundational lesson from our Indigenous education approach, that we teach knowledge to live and survive by, and to continuously communicate and engage with the world around us. These are principles that need to be reinvigorated within education systems to re-engage our children and peoples who have been let down by the system, while also affirming our individual and collective identities, our connections, and our belonging to country, and our deep and expansive knowledge of this continent. That depth of knowledge is held by Indigenous groups right across this country and the world. We have a right, we have a place in the education system. We need champions, we need people to be informed, to understand that, and to influence the change in the space and in the system that needs to be reformed. I conducted a national engagement at the outset of my term as Australia's Social Justice Commissioner. I wanted to engage with First Nations women and girls because the last time First Nations women and girls were engaged with was, at the time, 34 years ago, through the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, and a report that was commissioned and presented to them called Women's Business, 1986. Not good enough. So I travelled with my team to engage with First Nations women and girls right across the country. Women and girls spoke about education. Education and learning weaves its way through the entire Wi Yaniyu Dangani report, which means in Bunuba, women's voices or women's words. It was such a significant theme in the engagements with women and girls, and there is a dedicated chapter on education and learning. And across the country, women and girls highly valued education at all stages of life and wanted access to all forms of education, to engage in interests and opportunities. Women and girls saw education as the transformative vehicle. We don't want to see formal education come at the cost of culture and our identity. Women and girls are frustrated that there remains a perception that lower educational attainment for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is normal. Well, the bar was low when I went to school. They feel today that there is a failure to recognise that the education system is not providing equal opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is inconsistent in all of the government-funded learning spaces across the country. Far too many. In the chapter that we dedicated on education and learning in the Women's Voices report, we explored the pipeline of education from early years to university and the need to have access, no matter where you live, to quality, culturally safe education. There is a lot of discussion about Professor Langton's Curricula project, supporting teachers to deliver Indigenous content, and I know Marcia's got a session later on, so I won't go into that. There is also much discussion about weaving Indigenous languages, cultures, and knowledge systems across entire curriculum. Many concerns were raised about mainstream education excluding First Nations cultures and knowledges, and we heard from school students of the discrimination and the racism from their peers and teachers alike in some of these educational spaces. That the Indigenous student felt there was something wrong with them, that they then felt that they needed to leave and forego their right to an education because of these racist and discriminatory attitudes that still are alive in the education system. And girls across the country reported these incidents and the feelings of low self-worth caused by these behaviours. Issues were also raised about a lack of investment from all governments into supporting the development of a First Nations education system supporting Indigenous independent schools, largely in remote areas, training, recruiting, and retaining First Nations staff, training non-Indigenous teachers to teach First Nations curricula content, and creating culturally safe and trauma-informed teaching and education. Education that does this is a part of the real journey of truth-telling and reconciliation. It's empowering both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, teachers, families, and the broader society. So all Australian governments are required to improve access to education and learning opportunities in remote and very remote locations, including by investing in on-country models. And these were the types of recommendations that came through from the 2,000 plus women and girls we spoke with. That's captured in the 7 recommendations in the report. Governments invest into the survival of Indigenous cultures through increasing resourcing supports to school, to teach culture and ensure Indigenous students are able to access cultural supports, programs and activities within and outside of school, to ensure access to technology for students in remote areas to access online learning, as this is part of the modern reality and the world that many of our young people engage in. All governments work to incorporate Indigenous languages across school curriculum, in line with curriculum frameworks for Indigenous languages. Introduce mandatory university units and ongoing cultural competence training for teachers and increase Indigenous teachers and support staff. Greater investment into early childhood centres, including community-controlled child and family centres. Increase opportunities for the scholarships and financial assistance to access higher education and training. Create culturally safe and supportive universities, increasing the numbers of Indigenous students and staff. We've also captured education and learning in the implementation framework that we have now publicly made available from the Women's Voices report. But I want to acknowledge that currently the Australian curriculum cross-curriculum priorities for the compulsory years of up to and including year 10, so this is up to year 10, these are the 3 priority areas that currently stand: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia, and sustainability. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and culture priority is organised around 3 key ideas: country and place, culture and people. This priority supports the development of knowledge, understandings and competencies across Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' law, languages, dialects, literacies and numeracies, the significant contributions in the present and past of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and our knowledges, the relationship between culture and identity and consumer behaviour, the strength and resilience of contemporary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities against the impacts of colonisation, the enterprising ways in which diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples approach challenges and opportunities with resources to services navigating multiple worlds and ways of thinking and doing, and how governments support programs for wellbeing, behaviours and dispositions needed of all Australians to enable reconciliation, respect and recognition. And they are the areas that myself and my colleagues through the Studio Schools of Australia, through our middle years curriculum design, are incorporating these critical learning areas. So whilst this cross-curriculum priority stands as a national curriculum, when we have looked at this, and we support this wholeheartedly, but there were many concerns that women raised about the lack of compulsory subjects on Indigenous culture and histories, and there not being enough supports in place and training modules for teachers to deliver this effectively. So it can work well as a framework for independent models to incorporate that have serious guidance and advice of communities like Yuramalay, like the Studio School model, where we are employing Aboriginal staff. However, without this, it can be hard to implement across mainstream education. And that is where we're seeing the letdown. That is why we have recommended a far more rigorous approach through the Women's Voices report that includes making First Nations histories and knowledges at least a compulsory unit at all levels of education for everyone, improving curricular content and resources, having a First Nations teachers' recruitment, education and training and retention strategy for the entire nation, and improving cultural security and intelligence training for non-Indigenous teachers. We also focus on improving the development of language resources so there is more available to teachers to teach languages across all of the regions. We can do better. We have to do better. We owe this to our children and their futures. Thank you.